Hello. My wife became pregnant with her ex's child and said he made her feel alive in a way I never could. A few months later, she's asking me to take her back after he dumped her for her best friend. Looks like karma came around. My name is Josh. I am 38 and I work as a graphic designer for a small advertising studio in Seattle. Most of my work days are spent at a desk adjusting layouts, editing images, and dealing with clients who always want last-minute changes. The schedule is pretty predictable. I start around 9, finish around 6, and most evenings I am home with enough time to cook or relax before the next day starts. My wife is Isabel. She is 34. We had been together a little over 6 years and married for 3. Until recently, we lived together in a rented apartment not far from downtown. It was nothing fancy, but it worked for both of us. Rent was manageable, the neighborhood was quiet, and most of our routines were simple. Isabel has always been more outgoing than I am. She enjoys going out with friends, meeting people, and filling weekends with plans. I am the opposite. After spending the whole day in front of screens and clients, quiet evenings usually feel like a reward. For a long time, those differences balanced out fine. From the outside, our life looked pretty normal. Work during the week, groceries on Saturday, occasional dinners with friends, and the usual small routines couples build over time. If I am honest, though, things started shifting about a year ago. Isabel reconnected with someone from her past, an ex-boyfriend from before we met. His name is Christopher. They ran into each other at a mutual friend's birthday party one night. At first, she mentioned it casually. Just someone she used to date years ago who had apparently moved back to the city. I did not think much of it. Running into an ex is not exactly rare. What caught my attention later was how often Christopher's name started popping up in normal conversations. Not in a secretive way either. Almost like she wanted me to hear about him regularly. At the time, I assumed it was harmless nostalgia. Looking back now, that assumption turned out to be the first mistake I made. At first, the mentions of Christopher were small things that sounded harmless. Isabel would bring him up while telling random stories about her day. She said they had started talking again online after that birthday party. Old friends catching up. That was how she described it. Apparently, he had moved back to Seattle after spending a few years in another state. According to her, he did freelance photography and bounced between projects. The way she talked about him made it sound like he had some exciting, unpredictable life. That detail came up a lot. Christopher was always doing something interesting. Traveling somewhere. Working with some band. Shooting photos for some event. There was always a new story. Meanwhile, my stories were things like a client changing a logo color 5 times in the same afternoon. I did notice the comparison starting to creep in. It was never direct at first. Just little comments that carried a tone. Things like saying Christopher always seemed so passionate about what he did, or that he never looked stressed the way most people do. One night, she said something that stuck with me. She said Christopher had always known how to make life feel exciting. At the time, I did not argue about it. I just nodded and kept eating dinner. I figured she was just reminiscing about someone from a different part of her life. Looking back, that was the point where the tone started changing. About 2 weeks after they reconnected, she mentioned that Christopher wanted to grab coffee and catch up in person. She said it very casually while scrolling through her phone on the couch. I asked when. She said Saturday afternoon. I asked if anyone else from that old friend group would be there. She said no, just the 2 of them. I remember pausing for a moment because something about that felt slightly off. Not dramatic, just unusual. I told her I was not really comfortable with one-on-one meetups with exes. Her reaction came quickly and with a tone I had not heard from her before. She rolled her eyes and said I was being insecure. According to her, it was just coffee, and I was acting like she had done something wrong. That was the first real argument we had about Christopher, and it definitely would not be the last. The argument about the coffee meeting did not last very long. Isabel made it clear she had already decided she was going. The way she talked about it made it sound like my opinion was more of an inconvenience than something worth considering. She said it was ridiculous that I felt uncomfortable. According to her, adults should be able to meet old friends without their spouse acting like a jealous teenager. That was the exact phrase she used. Jealous teenager. I tried explaining that the issue was not jealousy. It was the fact that Christopher was not just some random old classmate. He was someone she used to date seriously. Her response was basically that I needed to trust her. The conversation ended with her saying she was going to meet him whether I liked it or not. Saturday came around, and she left the apartment around noon. She said they were just grabbing coffee at a place near the waterfront. I stayed home and worked on a few design revisions for a client. Nothing unusual. I tried not to overthink it. What did stand out was how long she was gone. Coffee turned into almost 6 hours. When she came back that evening, she looked unusually energized, like someone who had just come back from a really fun day. She talked about Christopher for the rest of the night. Apparently, they had not only grabbed coffee. They walked around the city for a while, stopped by a bar, and then met up with a few of his friends who were apparently in town for some photography event. She told the whole story with a lot of enthusiasm. What bothered me was not that she had a long afternoon out. It was the way she kept comparing everything. Christopher had such interesting friends. Christopher knew all these cool places around the city. Christopher had so many stories from traveling. At one point she laughed and said being around him reminded her how boring routine could feel. That line landed harder than she probably realized. I did not start a fight that night, but I remember lying awake later thinking about how quickly Christopher had gone from being an old acquaintance to the center of most of her conversations. And something about that shift did not feel small anymore. Over the next few weeks, Christopher kept coming up more and more. At first, it was just stories about messages they exchanged or things he was doing around the city. Then it turned into regular meetups. Coffee again. Then drinks. Then whole evenings where she would say she was meeting him and a few of his friends. Every time I questioned it, Isabel reacted the same way. Annoyed. Defensive. Like I was the one creating problems. She started using the same phrases over and over. That I needed to relax. That not everything had to be dramatic. That adults were allowed to have friends. What she avoided acknowledging was that Christopher was not just some new friend. He was an ex who was suddenly taking up a lot of space in our lives. The situation finally exploded about 2 months after that first coffee meeting. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because I had just finished a long day of revisions for a client and was looking forward to a quiet night. Isabel came home later than usual. She walked in, dropped her bag on the table, and told me she needed to talk. The tone alone told me something was wrong. We sat down in the living room, and she looked strangely calm, almost detached. Then she said she was pregnant. For a moment I did not react, because I assumed she meant our child. But the way she kept looking at me made the situation clear before she even finished explaining. She had been seeing Christopher behind my back, not just meeting for drinks, sleeping with him. She said it like it was something that had simply happened rather than something she chose to do. Then she said something that I still remember word for word. She said Christopher made her feel alive in a way I never could. That was the exact sentence. Alive. Like the past 6 years of our relationship had somehow been lifeless background noise. I asked her if she was serious. She said yes. After that, she just sat there watching my reaction like she was waiting for me to process the information. The entire conversation probably lasted 10 minutes. 6 years ended in 10 minutes. And the strange part is that Isabel did not look guilty while she said any of it. If anything, she looked irritated that I was not reacting the way she expected. I did not raise my voice after Isabel finished talking. There was a strange quiet in the room after she said everything, like the air had just settled into something final. For a few seconds, I just looked at her and tried to understand what exactly I had just heard. 6 years together. 3 years of marriage. And now she was calmly sitting across from me explaining that she had been sleeping with her ex and was pregnant with his child. I asked one question. I asked if she was serious about what she had just told me. She said yes. No hesitation. No apology. Just a flat answer. That was enough for me. I stood up from the couch and walked to the hallway closet where we kept a couple of travel bags. I grabbed one and brought it back into the living room. Then I set it on the table in front of her. She frowned and asked what I was doing. I told her she needed to pack a few things and leave. For the first time during that whole conversation, she actually looked surprised. She asked what I meant. I explained it slowly so there was no misunderstanding. She had cheated on me. She was pregnant with someone else's child, and she had just told me that man made her feel alive in a way I apparently never could. That kind of information ends a marriage. So the next step was simple. She needed to leave the apartment. The lease had always been in my name since before we got married, which made the situation legally straightforward. I was not throwing her onto the street with nothing. I was just making it clear she was not staying here after what she had just admitted. Isabel immediately became irritated. She said I was overreacting and that we should talk about things before making drastic decisions. That comment honestly caught me off guard. 10 minutes earlier, she had calmly explained that she was pregnant with another man's child. Now she wanted to discuss it like we were negotiating weekend plans. I told her there was nothing to discuss. Then I pushed the bag toward her and said she should start packing. After a long moment of staring at me, she finally stood up and started grabbing clothes. About 20 minutes later, she walked out of the apartment. She did not say goodbye. The door just slammed shut behind her. The apartment felt strangely quiet after Isabel left. Not peaceful, just empty in a way that takes time to notice. I sat on the couch for a while replaying the conversation in my head. The pregnancy, Christopher, the sentence about him making her feel alive. The more I thought about it, the more something became clear. There was nothing to fix. A lot of people in my situation probably would have tried to argue or convince their partner to stay. But the truth is that conversation had already answered everything that mattered. She had already made her choice long before that night. So instead of calling her or sending messages, I did something simpler. I blocked her number. Then I blocked her on every social app we had used to communicate. Not out of anger, just because there was no practical reason to keep that door open. The next morning, I called the leasing office and explained that my wife had moved out and that I would be continuing the lease alone. They confirmed everything was already under my name, so nothing really needed to change. After that, I went to work like any normal day. If my coworkers noticed anything different about me, nobody said it out loud. Most of my job involves sitting at a screen anyway, so it was easy to stay quiet and focused. About a week passed before I heard anything about Isabel again. The update came from a mutual friend named Kevin. Kevin texted me asking if everything between me and Isabel was okay. Apparently, she had posted several photos online with Christopher, and people were starting to talk. I kept the explanation simple. I told him she had been seeing Christopher behind my back and that she was pregnant with his child. Kevin took a few minutes before replying. When he finally did, the message was short. He said that explained a lot. Apparently, Isabel had already moved into Christopher's apartment. At that point, I just put my phone down. If that was the direction she wanted, then the situation was officially no longer my problem. About 3 months passed without any contact from Isabel. Life slowly settled into a new routine. Work during the day, quiet evenings, weekends spent catching up with friends I had not seen much while I was married. The strange part about breakups like that is how quickly normal life starts filling the empty space. By that point, I had stopped thinking about Christopher almost entirely. Then one night my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. Normally, I ignore unknown numbers, but for some reason I answered. It was Isabel. Apparently, she had borrowed someone else's phone. The moment I heard her voice, I almost hung up immediately. But I stayed on the line just long enough to hear what she wanted. Her tone was very different from the last time we spoke. Back then, she had sounded irritated and confident, like she had everything figured out. Now she sounded exhausted. She asked if we could talk. I told her we were already talking and asked what she needed. There was a pause before she started explaining. According to her, things with Christopher had not gone the way she expected. At first, she said everything felt exciting and intense, just like she had described before. But that apparently did not last long. A few weeks earlier, Christopher had started spending a lot of time with someone else. Not just anyone either. Isabel's best friend. The same friend who had been supporting her during the whole situation with our marriage. Eventually, Christopher stopped trying to hide it. He told Isabel directly that he did not want to deal with the pregnancy or the responsibility that came with it. And shortly after that, he started openly seeing her friend instead. In other words, Christopher walked away, and Isabel was suddenly alone. That was when she finally said the thing that explained why she was calling me. She asked if there was any chance I would consider taking her back. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard her. 3 months earlier, she had told me another man made her feel alive in a way I never could. Now she was asking if she could come back like none of that had happened. For a few seconds after Isabel asked that question, I did not say anything. I was trying to understand how she expected that conversation to go. 3 months earlier, she sat in our living room and told me another man made her feel alive in a way I never could. She cheated, got pregnant, and walked out without even saying goodbye. Now she was asking if she could come back. The logic did not add up. So I asked her something simple. I asked why she thought I would agree to that. She immediately started explaining. She said she had made a mistake. She said she got caught up in the excitement of reconnecting with Christopher and convinced herself that it meant something deeper. According to her, things with him were never as stable as she expected. He was unpredictable, unreliable, and once the pregnancy became real, he lost interest completely. Then she said something that made the situation very clear. She said she realized too late that I was the stable one in her life. That word stood out. Stable. Not loved. Not respected. Just stable. In other words, I was the safe option she expected to still be available after everything fell apart. I let her finish talking before I responded. Then I told her no. There was a long silence on the phone after that. She asked if I was serious. I said yes. The reason was simple. The version of our relationship she walked away from no longer existed. Once she chose to cheat and build something with Christopher, that decision ended whatever we had. You do not rewind something like that because the other plan failed. Isabel tried arguing for a few minutes. She said people make mistakes. She said we had history together. She said we could figure things out if I was willing to try. But the truth was that my mind had already been made up the night she walked out of the apartment. I told her I hoped she figured out her situation. But I was not part of it anymore. After I told Isabel no, the conversation did not end immediately. For a while she kept trying different angles, like she was searching for the one argument that might change my mind. First she said she was scared about going through the pregnancy alone. Then she said she did not have anywhere stable to live anymore since things with Christopher had fallen apart. Apparently, when he decided he did not want anything to do with the situation, he made that very clear. The apartment she moved into with him was his place, and once their relationship ended, she was the one who had to leave. So now she was staying with a relative for the time being. She explained all of this like it was supposed to make me reconsider. I listened without interrupting, but none of it actually changed anything. Eventually, she asked me directly if I could at least let her come back to the apartment until she figured things out. That was the point where I stopped the conversation. I told her very clearly that the apartment was no longer her home. When she walked out 3 months earlier, that decision closed the door on that part of her life. There was another long pause after that. Then she asked one more question. She asked if I really felt nothing after everything we had been through together. The honest answer was that I did feel something, but it was not what she expected. What I felt was clarity. The moment she sat across from me and explained that Christopher made her feel alive in a way I never could, the relationship stopped being something worth protecting. You cannot rebuild respect after hearing something like that. I told her I hoped she found a way to move forward and figure out what she needed to do next. But that path did not include me. After that, she stopped arguing. A few seconds later, the line went quiet and the call ended. After that phone call, Isabel never contacted me again. At least not directly. A few mutual friends mentioned hearing updates over the next couple of months. Apparently, the situation around her had gotten complicated very quickly. Christopher had fully moved on with the same friend Isabel told me about during our call. From what I heard, that relationship started almost immediately after he ended things with her. So the person she had chosen over our marriage ended up replacing her just as quickly. As for Isabel, she stayed with relatives for a while and eventually found a small apartment across town. I do not know many details beyond that, and honestly, I never felt the need to look into it. By the time those updates reached me, my life had already moved forward. The apartment felt different in a good way. Quieter, less tense. I rearranged some of the furniture, got rid of things that reminded me of the old routine, and settled into a rhythm that felt normal again. Work stayed the same. My days were still full of design revisions, client calls, and the usual last-minute changes that come with the job. But outside of work, there was something new. Peace. No constant arguments. No comparisons to someone else. No feeling like I was competing with a ghost from my wife's past. Just a simple life that made sense again. Looking back now, the strange part is that the moment everything ended was also the moment things became clear. When Isabel told me Christopher made her feel alive in a way I never could, she probably expected that sentence to hurt me for a long time. Instead, it did something else. It removed any doubt about what needed to happen next. Sometimes karma does not arrive in some dramatic way. Sometimes it just looks like someone realizing too late that the safe life they walked away from is no longer waiting for them. And by the time they notice, the door is already closed. Bye-bye.